Okay. Um, a quick agenda, and hopefully we'll be able to keep to our timing a little bit. We're already a touch late, but that's okay. So who is Sensei Project Solutions? Sensei is a Microsoft Gold certified partner, primarily focused in the project and portfolio management space. And in the past 5 years, we've been named finalist 4 times. And we are the only company in North America that has been named to that this year. So we're very happy to be so honored by Microsoft and recognized by Microsoft in this space. We've done over 500 PPM deployments, over 5,000 PMs and team members trained. We have clients in over 35 countries, and we have a physical presence in the United States, Canada, and Australia. And so, if you know your geography, I'm in the far left-hand bottom corner over there in the United States. And Sensei is built on 4 pillars. So we provide services, process maturity being one of those, technology guidance, etc. We also have a bunch of best practice solutions. We've got a solution called Beacon, which pulls together a great deal of data and configuration. And that's what I'm going to be demonstrating out of today. So you'll be able to see, different places in the application that align with process and reporting maturity. A lot of report packs and things like that. And we offer role-based training, and whether they're in books or e-learning or in person. Key of this is always learning. I'm always learning something new about the system, and it's a really great tool to be able to allow PMOs to manage faster, cheaper, and better. And we've also built some apps. We've got a Sensei Time Reporter app, which allows your teams to put in their task status in their mobile phones. We're pretty excited about that. Okay, enough of the sales pitch. Let's talk about maturity models. So whether you're looking at the capability maturity model or the project management maturity model, there really are 5 steps starting at the bottom. Level 1, the initial, that's where your processes are very, very reactive. They're not really controlled, ad hoc. People are doing pretty much whatever they feel like. And as you step up a level, processes, there are some processes in place for projects, but generally speaking, they're not well defined, or they are not well measured. And so, that's getting up a level. In level 3, you start to have documentation for your processes. You start to understand that people have a learning curve for making that stuff happen, and the organization adopts and values those processes. And that's really critical, is that the organization needs to value the process, needs to value the data, needs to value the people that are participating in this. Level 4, quantitatively managed. So you're starting to measure all of those processes. You're starting to understand the life cycle holistically, and you're controlling it. So you can literally see, if I start a project, if I need to stop it, it does stop. If I need to change resources around on a project, I can do that. And those resources will work in line with the projects that are going on. Level 5 really is focusing on process improvement. So you're not only just measuring, but you're also valuing it, and you're starting to optimize. So that means you're listening to the data begins to be trustworthy, and you're starting to see improvements, like being able to stop the slippage of a particular project, or be able to take corrective action more quickly to improve your project performance. In a manufacturing perspective, in a construction perspective, you'll find a lot of organizations manage and optimize often. They know exactly how long it takes to dig a ditch, and they can make sure that that happens predictably every time. So in some software organizations, there is no measurement. There's not a measurement that people will agree on, and that if requirements are moving around, it can be very difficult to commit to a particular course of action and to proceed and optimize that. And as I've been talking to customers over the last many years, I was really struck by this one customer who said, we're not so sure that we have the ability to optimize our tool set. We don't have the ability to even manage at a level, and the tool set that you're using is overwhelming. And it got me to thinking, we know about these capability models, we know about the project management maturity, but what is the database equivalent of that? What is the level of data that you want to start with first? And then how do you build on that data, and how do you start to collect that and look at that? And so I sort of stole this idea here, and I went and I sort of applied it to the level of data that makes sense within the project online database model. All right. So, essentially the first thing that you really start to be able to collect in a project online instance, or if people will start doing this in spreadsheets and graduate into SharePoint and other tools out there, but the concept of what is a project, that's a really, really fundamental sort of baseline definition that you want to get down and understand. And then typically you start to build on that, and you say, okay, well, here's the 100 projects that we are doing. And, here's the owner of that project, here's the start date of that project, the finish date of that project. And so you start collecting some metadata about the projects. And then if you're very lucky, you can start to build on that and put tasks in those projects. Once you put tasks in those projects, then you can start to track milestones and their dates, and whether or not those dates have deadlines in them, or whether they have links and constraints and other sort of task level metadata, which is helpful for knowing what phase a project is in. And then building on top of that foundation, once you start adding resources to those tasks, then you generate a whole nother level of information called assignments. And assignments allow you to understand the work, the cost, the start and the finish on an individual basis. And that's where a lot of organizations fear to tread, because they don't have a facility for aggregating that information, addressing that information, and they can't proceed past that point, because each project is just in a vacuum. It's a pile of costs, a pile of tasks that the resources aren't linked together. They aren't enterprise resources with a globally unique ID that allows you to aggregate the information across multiple resources. And this is typically where a project management system like Project Online, Microsoft PPM, project and portfolio management, has the concept of enterprise resources. And those allow you to publish your project to the Project Online instance and aggregate that information. So instead of having a John Smith, a J Smith, a Smith J, and a, a, a John, multiple local resources that are all the same people, but they're not being able to be aggregated by the system. The concept of your Project Online being able to provide an enterprise resource then allows you to really step up to the next level and be able to plan, um, you know, being able to plan whether people are going to be busy this week, next week, 3 months down the line, 6 months down the line, and start to ward off some of those disasters where you're slipping schedules and you haven't you're just because you don't have the people. So project actually provides this concept of enterprise resources. Once you have resources in your plan, there's also rate tables that can be assigned to those resources. When you add a resource to a task, you get an assignment, and that assignment allows you to aggregate cost and use that rate table to be able to develop a cost infrastructure. And once you have those costs, then that's very telling, because oftentimes projects should be killed early on because their costs aren't estimated well enough. And you really, really want to be able to say, can we do this? Should we do this? And you really, having costs in your schedule makes that appropriate and makes that possible. Last but not least, really the icing on the cake as far as the project data model is concerned is the ability to capture baselines. If you can snapshot your data at a particular time, whether it's quarterly, whether it's monthly, whether it's at any given a phase trigger. When we get out of requirements, we're going to have a baseline. When we get to design, we're going to have a baseline. When we get to execution, we're going to have a baseline. Doesn't really matter, but that concept of I now have something to refer back to. I can say this was our original scope, and assuming that you're keeping your plans up to date, you certainly can compare what the current plan is with what the baseline is. And I can't tell you how many organizations that I have worked with over the years that refuse to save a baseline because the project is changing so often that they literally are prohibiting baselines from being saved because they don't want to know the amount of churn, the amount of swirl, the fact that the team may be going around and around and around in circles, and they've been covering up their footsteps because they have no baseline. And so it's very frustrating in organizations trying to get them to the level where they have the confidence in their schedules to be able to take a baseline and move on into earned value. Earned value is a derivative metric that requires costs, requires baselines, and then allows you to make judgments about your project progress and the state of your spending. And it's a really great mature way of looking at projects, but it requires all of this data. And the bottom line is you have to lead from where you are. Most organizations are starting at the bottom. They may have some tasks in their plan. They may not want to look at resources, but if they do, if they can push through to that level, there's a great deal of goodness and a greater capacity to take corrective action. And so you have the going back to this slide, once the process is defined and you're starting to manage the metrics, you can start to optimize. So too, when you have your projects and your tasks together, when you add resources, that's where you can really start to understand your costs and your baselines start to come together. So I would just want to encourage you to think about this process and to focus on the essentials. And I will show you some reports that we've developed in our environment to help us focus on those levels. All right, so let's step back for a moment and let's do a quick overview of what the kind of life cycle of information is in a project online environment. So, project is not just the MPP file on a file share focused primarily on the project manager anymore. So with the Microsoft Project Online environment and the Project Server environment before that, you have a database in the middle to be able to store your files and to be able to share that information. And one of the things that the Project Online has done, team has done over the years, is developed different views and different capabilities on top of that data to distribute that information out to your stakeholders. So whether they're executives that are starting a governance workflow, whether they're team members that are responding to tasks, you have a much richer capability to to distribute this information. Instead of, oh, I've got to output it to an Excel file, I've got to send that via an email. You press a button, you say publish. The team member has a license. They go to the website, and there's all of the information. People are like, oh, do I have to license all of these people? That's so expensive. And when you really come down to it, the money that you save in being able to distribute this information more than pays for itself. The team member license for this is $7. Retail is $7 per person per month. And if you think, here's a person that might be making $50 an hour or $100 an hour. Do I really want that person hunting through emails all the time? Can't I just give them instant access to the updated information that they need? Yeah, it's a no-brainer to be able to justify those license costs. But there's a series of use cases that are interesting to look at, whether it's proposals and workflow approvals, whether it's templates and enterprise resources, or schedules, either draft in process or finalized and published. Storing those in that Project Online database allows them to be then distributed. So the task assignments can go out to the team members in Project Web App. We also have a free app called Sensei Time Reporter that you can download from the Apple App Store or the Google Play Store to be able to have your Android or your Apple device and be able to access your tasks right on your mobile device. So getting those task assignments, well, that's great, but this is also a bi-directional sync. So those task updates and approvals flow back to the database, flow back to the project manager, so that there's a virtuous cycle of being able to communicate out. And it's really when you distribute the information and you've got an active process of getting people's feedback on the tasks. It may be as simple as saying, that's the wrong date, please update it. Or it might be as sophisticated and as powerful as being able to say, you estimated that task at 40 hours. I finished it in 8, and my remaining work is 0. When you can say that, when a team member can say that to you as a project manager, then you've got a virtuous cycle of feedback. Your estimates get better, your execution gets better, and you have you get all of the benefits of your investment in the time and effort to develop these systems. Now, looking at this system sort of orthogonally, just, Microsoft has built these tools on top of SharePoint. So Project runs as a service inside of the SharePoint ecosystem, and Sensei actually comes in and modifies this environment. You'll see some of those modifications today. We've built in best practices, we've built in reports and things like that. And then there's a company specific configuration. So of course, you're going to have custom fields defining your phases. You're going to have custom fields that you want to use to categorize your resources. Is this a contractor or a full-time employee? Is this person a SQL developer, or are they some other type of resource? So being able to configure all of that, you really want to start with a good foundation. And so Project Online is that foundation for us. And then we've baked in a bunch of PMI standards, Gartner recommendations, and our own best practices. Just a plug for the PMI community. It is a great organization to be able to understand a practice standard for scheduling, for work breakdown structures. The PMBOK is a great resource for you. And so I hope that you will take advantage of that. A lot of what you see today is following some of those standards. So when you have a tool that is built in, you get some great data out. So let's talk a little bit about project data. So the project, this is a brief, sort of snippet of the project data model. You've got this a project definition, you've got a task definition, you've got assignments, you've got resources. So reading from left to right, you've got your projects, your tasks, your assignments, and your resources. Those are all tables inside of the data model that as you develop a schedule and as you start managing a schedule, you start accumulating all of these measurements in these tables. And one of the things that the project database really brings together is time. So you've got this time by day table, which describes the days of the week, and daily you're able to put in that data. You've then got cost data that gets associated with this. So your assignment cost, a lot of these roll up at each level. So depending upon what resource you have and what you've got as far as assignments are concerned, those all aggregate up into the project level and allow you to see that data there. So it's a mature schema. I've been working on this schema since the late 90s. It existed for a little bit before then in a company called eLabor. Microsoft, I think made an acquisition way back when, built that in. And so there's a synchronization process that we saw between the Project Online database and the project database. And so you've got all of this information flowing back and forth between the server and the client. One of the reasons why I got into this business is because this is extensible. The Project Online interface provides a ability to modify your enterprise custom fields and views. So you can add data to resources, you can add data to tasks, you can add data to projects. So again, you can track your metadata. So you've got, this rich data set. There's the relationships between the tables are well known, and they really are helpful in being able to access this information And we're going to see some reports and some views in the Project Online world that allow you to get at this. But there's tons and tons of data, and it is extensible. In the move to Project Online, this was based in SQL. Microsoft reduced the threat service and exposes this data to you from your permission model via OData. So you can get at this data in an internet-friendly protocol. Sometimes it's a little bit slow. We do have a product called Reporting Hub where we can expose stuff to SQL, which opens up your options a little bit, but you can get at this data. Now, one of the sort of key considerations when you're doing reporting is to understand the model and to be able to pull together the data in a way that produces the result that you're looking for. And because this is a fairly complex model, you may need to structure your reporting schema slightly differently if you're looking at resources rather than projects. So, because this is a project management system, this is called Project Online, the typical schema is very project centric. So you'll see these, you have all sorts of data about your projects, and then you've got relationships up into various other tables in the schema. This schema I pulled out of Power BI. This is from one of the Power BI dashboards that we sell, and Power BI is a great tool because you can play around with your schema very easily, and this is a typical one that's very project centric. You'll notice down here to the right, tasks, assignments by day, so you actually have that hierarchy. Remember, tasks are a member of a project, and resources, when they are assigned to a task, generate this assignment. All right. And so and then that assignment can be over multiple days. And so the project actually has a serializer that when you publish that project, it allocates those hours according to the duration of the work. And so it's, there's a lot of moving parts here. You want to sort of think about who's your audience, what's my goal for these reports, and then pull them together. Now, there's also SharePoint data that can be associated with your project. So in a Project Online environment, typical Project Online environment where you're publishing a project and you're creating a SharePoint site, you then have a set of SharePoint lists, documents, issues, risks, deliverables. Those are the ones that come out of the box. Sensei has actually extended that to include decisions, action items, change requests. So you can extend this model to cover all of the typical artifacts of a project management oversight and project management structure and process. All of these items have, in this particular schema, have a project UID. And so that's what is your unique identifier so that you can, when you do a select of a particular project, you can see what its risks and issues are. If you wanted to look at risks holistically, you can select just the risks and then you can see across multiple projects, but you need that project UID to go back and get the project name, which is out here in this project table. So, I won't go into detail of SQL. I actually had to teach it to myself many, many, many years ago, and it's a very powerful way of addressing data and a good way of thinking about the world. So this is a typical schema. Again, a resource-centric model might be different because instead of putting the putting the project in the middle of the things, you may actually join your resources list. You'll notice there's no resource list in this particular schema, but we would, look at one of those tables, and the principal join is between the assignment, and then you would come back up through the task. So this would probably not be attached to the project directly, but it would come up through the task, and then you would have a resource table here. So just some considerations on how you put together models. And it's complicated. You want to start very simply, and you want to start to build that. I was talking to a client yesterday who said, I'm looking at tasks, and I'm getting all the information doesn't. What I put in my project is not what I'm getting out of my report. And I said, well, when you put data into a project has hundreds of thousands of lines of code, which is managing that aggregation between summary task and the detail tasks and the milestones. And when it gets dumped into the database, you have to use some of those features of the task level fields, like task is summary, task is active, to understand whether you're pulling the right aggregation up. Speaking of that, it is very helpful when you're building these types of models to understand some basic calculations and how they work in the project data model. And this I call order of operations, but the idea is that you've got project, which has a lot of calculations in it, that when you place a resource on a task and create that assignment, suddenly duration equals work divided by the assignment units. And now those fields, those nice separate fields that say, okay, I've got these days here, I've got these hours here, and I can keep those separate. As soon as you put in a resource, now those are connected, and you start to see, if I make a change to the work, it may change my duration. And whether or not I choose to change duration or work or units and the value of my task type, so I can fix one of those, if you think of it as I fix one, I modify the second so that project can solve for the third, then it helps to say, okay, if I've got 8 hours, if I've got 1 day of duration, and that equals 8 hours at 100% of the units, well, if I change those units to 50%, meaning I'm only available 50% of that time, then that 8-hour work suddenly spreads over 2 days. And so knowing that that calculation is happening and the direction of your entry matters, that will help you to be able to model good information in this system. So when you push it out to the server, when it comes up into the reports, you start to see that that data is consistent and is what you're expecting it to be. Likewise, work equals actual work plus remaining work. And so that actually assists you with modeling a task and its progress through its life cycle. So if I have a 8-hour task and I've done 4 hours of actual work, that would mean that I have 4 hours of remaining work. And that is a start. But sometimes you get 4 hours into a task and suddenly you realize that it was misestimated and you need an additional 8. So 8 plus 4 equals 12. So your work estimate changes. And understanding that life cycle of that data is very helpful to get some better continuity between what you put into the system and what you get out of it. And project managers are busy people. When they're maintaining this level of data, they want to do it simply, they want to do it quickly, and so you have to be adopt some standards of a particular task type so that you can get consistent information. the project infrastructure actually changed in the between the 2003, 2002, 2003 into the 2007 release. They adopted a queue and a cache. So there's a queue on the project online side, which is listening for those changes, and there's a cache so that you can work on that data on your local workstation. Those two communicate with each other and are interrogating timestamps as well as version numbers to keep the data consistent on the Project Online database so that those people that are looking at it from a browser or from a phone or through a report to keep that consistent, because oftentimes a project manager will change this, they'll publish it, and maybe they're only changing a single line. Will that queue and that cache communicate and make that interaction more quickly? In the 2003 timeframe, you used to send the entire file every time you made a minor change. It would output this huge XML file to the view drop folder, and you would wait for the server to actually pick that up and then process it into the database. So it's much more efficient now than it's ever been. So oftentimes you want to make sure that that synchronization is happening. You want to manage that people are publishing their data frequently, and there's no harm in publishing often. You want that data to be up to date as often as possible. And from a systemic process, when you're trying to transform an organization and you've got hundreds of project managers that have to move from Excel spreadsheets and emails to what I like to call stone knives and bearskins, from the older technologies to a new enterprise project management system, you want to adopt a crawl, walk, run methodology. So start slowly. Let's just put our project data in. Let's not worry about the other levels of data, and let's get that process going. Let's get that process right. Then let's worry about the other tiers of data, like tasks, like milestones, like resources. All of those can happen in the process, and they can happen in your life cycle, but they don't have to happen all right away. You want to take an incremental approach so that you're more likely to be successful with this. So just some considerations on that particular topic. I had another customer recently who said, you know, why don't I do this? Why don't I do this in Excel? What's the benefit of adopting this infrastructure? And Project really actually solves a series of technology problems in distributing this information. So you could say, oh yeah, our projects are simple. I just need a spreadsheet to deal with, and I'll put that on a shared drive, and that's fine. Well, in fact, there is a host of concurrency issues and version control issues that you want to address, and Project Online was invented to do that. If you go into a meeting and you've got 5 different people with 5 different versions of the spreadsheet, it immediately devolves into, well, my version's up to date. No, my version's up to date. And my version is completely different from yours. And you start to have this breakdown of communication, a breakdown of progress. And so one of the things that Project Online was invented to solve was version control, file locking, serialization, data transformation, data distribution. So what is great about this data model is it when you publish a project and you've changed duration, it will serialize that information and it'll pull it out into the time phased buckets so that when I put an hour on Monday, the timesheet knows what Monday is and where it came from, and it puts the data in the right bucket. If you haven't, if you're doing this in Excel, you actually would need a whole different file structure to be able to handle this data and this type of data as easily and as efficiently. The data transformation piece is key. How many project managers are stuck in the process of distributing out this data, of rekeying it. Oh, here, fill out this spreadsheet. I'll put the spreadsheet into the schedule. The schedule spits out another thing. Then I got to put it back into a spreadsheet. No. Don't get caught in the trap of you literally, I don't believe at least, that you can ascend the maturity curve without the help of these tools. And so I really do believe that I think if you adopt a system that will do the data transformation for you, do the data distribution for you, then you have an easier time of actually managing and taking care of that data. There's lots of different data types. There's the whole concept of calendaring. So Project Online, was invented to solve some of these technology problems, but there's also a common business problem. You throw this out at the executive team, project managers, and you're answering business problems. What projects are we working on? What is their relative priority? When are we going to deliver? Why are my projects slipping? Who's working on what? Who's over allocated? Who's under allocated? What's our budget? Are we overspending? Ultimately, who's in charge? And all of these questions, you have to think about, what does the executive want? What does the project team need to be able to be efficient in driving projects forward? And one of the reasons why I love Project Online so much is just that it solves a lot of these problems. You put the data in, you expose it to all of your constituencies, and of course, they're going to give you feedback. But you only get better if you can address that feedback. Now, those audiences, it's important to think about those audiences. One audience is just your project team. They need to know what they're working on, what the dates are for what they're working on, but you also have the project managers who are managing that. They need to provide status. And then you've got the data flowing up there, and then you've got executives. Now, in the best of all possible worlds, this information is all based on the same thing, that you're reducing the number of cycles of rekeying at each one of these levels. I cannot tell you how many organizations I've seen that what the executive sees is completely divorced from what the project manager is managing and what the project team knows. There's an anecdote out there that project teams usually know about project failure weeks and weeks, and if not months and months before the executives do. So you want to avoid that trap of having to recreate reports and dashboards. And really the concept, the guiding principle that Sensei uses is that we're connecting these data sources with the uses of this data out amongst the constituencies. And with tools like Power BI now, you can create these visuals that are compelling. And so I want to talk just briefly about tools. So depending upon which audience you want to reach, you may choose Excel, you may choose Power BI, you could choose SQL Report Builder. Those are the three most popular that we're involved with. And some of them are pretty old. I mean, Excel has been around for many, many, many years, and it does, great relationships. It supports relationships now fairly well, and pivot tables and VLOOKUP. It's got a lot of great ways to manipulate data, and it's been around for a while. A lot of people are familiar with it. And so it's a way of distributing your project data, so it's an endpoint. It's not necessarily the data source. The data source is usually that project database, but it's a nice way of distributing that information. Power BI is very young. It's been around for about 2 years, maybe a little bit more, but it is very visual. It also has a service behind it, so you can publish your reports to a report server, and it will actually handle a daily, hourly refresh of data so that it's constantly going out to the data source, keeping that up to date. It supports multiple data sources. They're adding, SAP and Oracle and SharePoint and all sorts of different data sources. So wherever your data is, you can pull it into your dashboard and do these nice mashups. And it supports modern, protocols like OData and things like that. SQL Report Builder is a older tool, but it rocks. It allows you to, build parameters into almost every item on your canvas. Very powerful. You can, can have direct SQL statements, and it's a free download. And there's a lot of things you can do with it. It also takes a little bit to know. So you have to think about your report authors, and can they access this, and what is the right tool for the right job. Okay, enough of the chatting. I do want to talk about demonstrating key metrics at each uh, point in the process. And so what I want to do is I want to take these in what I call maturity order. So let's talk about, where do we put project data? How do we see that project data? Then when we put tasks into those projects, what does that look like? What are some of the key data that you want to address? Then when we add resources into that, what does that do? What do we need to know about those resources, and where can we get them? So in this matrix, I'm going to be taking you through the project center, and then we're going to go look at some project KPIs and some task level KPIs. Then we're going to look at the resource center. We're going to start to look at some of the metadata about those resources. Then we're going to get down to assignments, and assignments can be distributed out, via heat maps. So you can see the amount of work that people have done. That's a very compelling visualization. But they can also be distributed to task sheets and timesheets so that your team can have an easy place to go get that information. Then when you layer on costs underneath that, we've got some Power BI dashboards to show costs and to work, and to see when you're storing that data in baselines, what that looks like. Then I'll take you on to an app that we wrote called the Portfolio Advisor, which actually gets to the structure of your plans and allows you as a PMO to really have a data-driven conversation with your project managers about the quality of the schedule that they're maintaining and the quality of their issue and risk management process. And this is really, gets to a higher level of maturity. It also is a vehicle just to monitor whatever level you're at. So it allows you to sort of see that. And then we'll talk a little bit about a workflow visualization. So let's take a look at some of these items. So let me shift gears here for a moment. And let's take a look. So this is Project Online right here. This is the front web page of the Project Online environment. This is our beacon solution. We've configured this, to expose different items on the quick launch bar as well as on the top link bar here. And so we've configured it with specific views in the project center and the resource center. So this is a nice way and place to manage your projects. So let's talk about that first piece of the project, which is just the project list, the project center itself. So the project center is just a listing of your projects, and it rolls up the start and finish work, and you can configure these views to roll up information. We actually embed into the project data model these KPIs, and these are just formulas that interrogate your baseline. You don't have to necessarily start out with these. You can have all sorts of different views. A basic summary view that's just a basic list of what's the project, when does it start, when does it complete and work. So if nothing else, if every single one of these projects were blank, you would have the ability to go to one place and say, okay, that's the name of the project, that's when it starts, that's when it finishes, that's what the percent complete is. So that is a start at managing and putting together, the data from your projects into one list. And you can save these from Project Pro to a server, or you can create them new. You can have different enterprise project types. But the idea is that you have a simple view that tells people, what are we working on? Okay, so that's a start, and you can configure these views very easily in PWA settings. So you can start to group them by owner. Okay, well, Brett is working on these projects, and those are the phase that it's in. So that's great. So you can choose these different views and build these type of views. Okay, who's sponsoring these? Well, we've got Jerry and Bob and Joe, and they each have projects that they're sponsoring. So if you have Joe coming to you and saying, I've got two projects that I'm interested in, Zurich database upgrade and Greenwood data consolidation. When are they going to be done? Well, right now, your Zurich database upgrade is going to be done 6/21/2019. What percentage complete is it? 0. We haven't started it yet. Are you sure we're going to get done? Well, we're planning to start it coming up here in September. So you have the ability to respond to these requests, and better yet, you have the ability to say, hey, Joe, I'm going to give you this view. You can come see it yourself. That's really, really helpful. So a basic project center view is a great place to start. And you can start to look at other levels of data. Once you want to add tasks to a project, then you can drill down on any one of these. This link is a drill down, and it takes you down into a project view. And a project view then lists out the tasks. And one of the key differences between Project Server 2003 and 2007 was the ability to edit this data in place. So now you can actually edit this project in the browser and start to manipulate this data. So as you want to start listing out tasks. Now for larger schedules, you want to start with a template. But with smaller schedules, you can just go in, start to put in some data. And again, we have this concept of views. And one of the things that Sensei's done a really nice job of is to start at the beginning and say, okay, for detailed scope, we just really need to put down the tasks and the duration, and maybe the type of work. And so you just, start to list out the tasks. We're not focused on resources yet. We're not focused on costs yet. We just want to know what the task name is. And we take you in, order of complexity. Okay, so you've got scope, you've got budgeting, you've got dependencies, you've got deadlines. So all of the sort of key parts that start to build out your schedule. those are things that you can start to gather at this task level. So whether it's dependencies, you want to see predecessors, whether it's deadlines and constraints, to be able to see when the deadlines are. Deadlines is a key field. If you put a deadline on a milestone, you get some great calculations that'll give you an early heads up on when those milestones can be configured or be delivered. And if you're linking your tasks together, that schedule becomes this beautiful accordion, which starts to recalculate those dates for you and let you know if there's a change in the schedule, when that date is going to be delivered. So at that sort of second level of maturity, you're really starting to layer in those tasks and starting to build out that information. So lots of views to do it within Project Web App, and we actually have project views as well. So if you wanted to open up this in Microsoft Project, same information. You've got that nice cache and queue that are moving the data back and forth so that you can start to gather that info. Now, a key part of a Project Online implementation is the resource pool. And so we've got a view. This is an app into the resource heat map. You could also look at the resource center. So the resource center is the built-in functionality. This is just a list of your resources, and it's important to build out a model where you've got roles separate from, so this business analyst, well, these are real people. This is your generic, and you can separate the the work that's assigned to each one. And so you can put your resource demand on the generic, and then you can also manage the amount of work that you can see on those resources. So once you assign a resource to a task, that creates the assignment, and then that work starts to be visible in the different places in the application. So one is on the quick launch bar up here, this My Resources app, our resource heat map application that we've built into it. And there's availability, there's engagements. Engagements came in the 2016 timeframe, allows you to formalize that agreement between the resource manager. But this resource heat map view really has changed the way people look at it. So instead of having just columns of numbers that you can't really decipher on, with the conditional formatting, you can start to see where you're exceeding your capacity and understanding whether the requests for people are they working on too much, or for some people, are they working on too little? That measurement goes both ways, and you'll find yourself managing both at the same time. Now, we've built a purpose-built dashboard called the O6 My Resources. This is in our Power BI content pack, again, lifting up the conditional formatting. You can do this conditional formatting in Excel, and it's very helpful for visualizing issues. We wrap those up in we sort it by negative availability. So your problem children are up on top. As you get down further down in the resource pool, these are people that are under allocated. They have lots of availability. They're not as well tasked as these top performers here. So you can manage really whether or not how you assign that data. And the key thing, once you have a resource pool, you've got tasks assigned to those people, is you can start to look at what are they working on. So you can drill through. First, holistically, let's look at the resource and understand, it may be, Power BI is so visual, you can just click on a visualization and it'll calculate a lot of the other graphics. So oftentimes any given project, the resource allocation is fine. They're not over allocated. They're fine. But if you start to pull together, you know, a different, this project, the Greenwood data consolidation, is only, totaling about half of what Stephen Alexander can work on. But the fact of the matter is that when you pull together this general worldwide and the Greenwood data consolidation, plus the support, plus the Tacoma Systems R450 development, this person is chronically over allocated, especially in January, 162 hours. You need more people, to handle these tasks. And so if you look at it from a resource perspective, being able to understand this data, takes you to another level. These projects are going to slip if, in fact, that data does not get done, if those tasks don't get done. And so you can drill down from the resource down into the assignment details and actually see what are they working on. So we can, drill up here and we can see just Stephen, or we can come down and say Stephen and the projects that they're working on. And here's this, huge 338-hour month in January. And then we can go down to the assignments underneath the projects and see, well, what all are they working at? Well, there's a detailed schema there. There's connectivity there. There's some business and technical requirements. Then we've got second level help desk support. We've got a pilot going on. It's too much. We need to address the fact that Stephen can't be doing all of this. And to be able to model this information, this is not minute by minute. This is a daily or a monthly exercise where you're aggregating the information, you're looking at it, you're being able to take corrective action. And so one of the nice parts of Power BI is any one of these items you can pin to a new dashboard or an existing dashboard, and I can actually take this and drop it onto my own customized dashboard and start to see this data all together with other data that I care about. And if I need to distribute it to a phone, I download the Power BI app onto my phone, and I can start to see this data, on my phone. So it's a really easy way to distribute. And yes, you do need a Power BI Pro license to be able to distribute this. But when you think about it, if you have a team member who's making $40, $50 an hour, maybe $100 an hour, if they spend more than 15 minutes looking for this information, you've already paid for that license because they're wasting time gathering paper, trying to read the spreadsheet, trying to figure it out when they can create their own dashboard and have this information at their fingertips. Now, when a project manager publishes a task with a resource assigned to it, that task then populates either a task sheet or a timesheet inside of the Project Online application. And this is a very powerful construct for distributing tasks out to people. You're not rekeying anything, you're just publishing your project file. And boom, those tasks are showing up here. The team member then can respond by putting work into particular buckets, changing their remaining work, or the system could be configured just to capture percent complete. The problem with percent complete is it is inaccurate and it assumes that the estimate was correct. And I don't know how many of you have ever seen the percentages of correctly estimated tasks, but it's pretty low. You don't necessarily know whether a task is going to take 40 hours, 8 hours, 16 hours, and you want to be able to get that quantitative feedback. And this system is designed to be able to put in the actual and the remaining work. So once you put in the remaining work, then that decrements from the work, and you can start to see the differences between what you thought it was going to be in your baseline and what it actually is. So that is a process of distributing data out, getting that quantitative data back, and being able to adjust the schedule based upon that. So when you have this approval queue over here, and so I can go in and I can see the tasks that have been submitted to me on the project that I'm managing, and I can actually preview what these updates would do to my schedule before I accept them. Once I accept them, this data is going to go automatically back into my plan and start to reschedule based upon my link structure and my critical path. So it's a really nice way to get the data out there, get people's feedback on it, and have that come back into the process. And the project manager gets visibility and control. And that's the key part, is that the project manager is in the middle of this. This is a closed loop. They have the ability to evaluate the data before it comes into the schedule, and they can start to see that data as it comes in. Now, if you're in a more formalized process, you can output this to a timesheet. This is still driven by the project. So when I publish a project to a task that has a resource assigned, and I publish that puts this assignment down onto this timesheet. So the timesheet is a dynamic one. One of the things you'll notice with a lot of legacy timesheet applications is it's got 6 or 8 tasks, and they, are just very generic. It is not sufficient information to be able to manage a project with. But these are real tasks, real deliverables coming right out of the schedule and allowing you to put in not just your actual work on the deliverable itself, but also your administrative time. So you can get a more complete picture of whether people are available for the work and whether that how much time they're spending on administrative tasks. I would like to encourage you. We're proceeding apace here. I've got a couple of more things I'd like to show you, but if you can start thinking about questions that you have, would love to answer them. Would love to show you some things that the system can do. So please feel free to start putting in some questions in the question box. Now there's, so getting down to that task level, so that's a higher level of maturity. You've assigned that to people. Then, being able to look at projects, once you've got the project data in, you've got the task level data in, you're starting to exchange the quantitative data around those tasks. Okay, Joe, thank you for that question. Is there a way to assign resources at a summary level and assign them using a percent allocation, not hours? There is to both counts. However, the system does a funny thing on the summary task level, which is it'll actually it may double count some of that data. And let me actually show you an example of that. You want a summary to be a summary. Our recommendation is not to put projects at so here is a summary task. And I'm sorry, this is a little bit small. Bear with me. If you can raise the resolution of your screen or lower it, this will look better. But task 1, task 2, and if I indent those to create that summary. So I've got my summary task, and I've got a resource name, I can go get this resource name from the enterprise resource pool by going into build team. And here I am, I'll add myself to this task. Now, the key thing when you're adding these is to look at the work estimate. So when I put Mark Reed on this task, it's 1 day, it's 8 hours. Now, if I put Mark up here, let's say I put Mark down here too. So we've got 2 8-hour tasks. If I put Mark up here too, it actually creates another assignment. And now it kind of looks like 8 plus 8 equals 24. And it's really, really disconcerting. A lot of people don't understand that. Why is that the case? So generally, we recommend that you pull that resource off of that so that the summary can be a summary and do that. Now, when you're in project, you've got a whole bunch of different views, one of which is a task usage view. And let me see if I can get one, budgeting and cost tracking. So you can actually change this view from looking work into different detail styles, and you can look at your percent allocation. So if I put a P in here, I can look at my percent allocation. And so you can manage that percent allocation here and drag it across and be able to populate that data on a percentage basis rather than just a work basis. So that, the system does a lot of conversion in both sides. And so you do have the ability in a resource plan to put in a percentage item. And I would leave those summaries as well. So yes, it can get complex. You do want to make sure that the tasks are the right size and stuff. I do want to talk about a couple of other reports and then this application in a moment, but thank you for that question. So we have a Power BI dashboard that pulls out cost level data. Once you have a team member assigned to a task, and if that team member has a rate table associated with them, then you can start to pull out data. And if you're saving a baseline or if you're using budget resources, you can model budget costs, baseline costs, and the nice thing about this is you can also categorize cost types. So if you go down a level, you can actually look at hardware, labor, software. Most of your projects are going to be modeling labor, but in some instances, you will have software costs, hardware costs, and you'll want to look at those as well. So when you get up into those upper levels, you've got your project, you've got your resources, you've got your tasks, you've assigned those resources to those tasks, and then you can start to look at your costs. Well, if you have a cost type on that resource, then you can interpret, what are my hardware budget? What's my labor budget? What's my software budget? So you can get down to, transforming this data into not just hours, but also dollars, and dollars based upon a particular type of resource. So we also have another view from a particular work perspective. We've got costs and we've got work. Work is helpful to manage so that you can start to see the baseline work, the actual work, the remaining work, what your work variance is. And again, these KPIs roll up from a project level, from a task level to a project level, and then we've got some project level KPIs that we can look at as well. These we set up in our Beacon solution to basically create a threshold. So if the project is less than 10% over the baseline, it's green. If it's over between 10 and 20% over the baseline, it's yellow. And if it's over 20% over the baseline, then it glows red. This is an early warning system for you, and I highly recommend you take this approach of using baselines and being able to see this information more easily. Because especially in those for some of your stakeholders that don't have a lot of time, they want to know what's red, why is it red, and what are we going to do about it, rather than, okay, this is the number, this is what the number we thought it was, et cetera, et cetera. So you want to get into taking action on the data quickly rather than worrying about gathering the information and spending all of your time, just in the minutia of lining up the columns in your spreadsheet. No, it's better to start with some of these things that are pre-built. Now, as you go forward into the higher levels of maturity, we've actually built an application called the Portfolio Advisor, and it is sitting on top of our Beacon solution. So if you wanted to talk with us about that Beacon solution, you would get this. What this is this is an application that uses the REST interface and some of the data to um, do a series of governance checks. So is the project status date current within a particular set of days? Has it been published? Does it have overdue risks or overdue issues? Does the number of active issues exceed a certain threshold? Are there unsubmitted timesheets in the past? This is leveraging this data, but it's taking it to a new level to where you're able to manage the structure of the data and really build telemetry around your project infrastructure, both from a governance perspective, are you following your own processes, and a structural perspective of the schedules themselves. Is the work breakdown structure well formed? Are the resources assigned? We've actually got one. Resources should not be assigned to summary tasks. So there's that answer. We want to make sure that people aren't doing that so that they're keeping their summaries straight and they're keeping track of those assignments well. Are there resource assignments that don't exist for detailed tasks? So have you got tasks that aren't assigned to people? Milestones having durations, tasks with durations of longer than X days or shorter than X days. This task decomposition one is very, very helpful because, projects that have great big monolithic tasks, slip very easily and that critical path can be obscured. So you do want to be able to interrogate this, but this allows you to set up some checks and then compiles the results of that analysis on those schedules into a leaderboard. So we've got clients who are using this who are competing for the gold cup or the silver cup, and it allows you to have a data-driven conversation with your project managers to say, okay, let's take a look at the projects that you're working on and what are the issues with that project. So I can drill down into that project and I can see whether the work breakdown structure has some issues or whether the schedule has some issues. Oh, I see some tasks haven't been added to the baseline. So this is probably an expansion of scope. Do we want to add this to the baseline so that we can, is it part of the original scope or maybe it's not? But at least we have the ability to understand that data. So this is really icing on the cake type stuff where you can start to see patterns and really build a learning environment in your PMO and be able to address what your project management structure is and how well your teams are working on that. Now, I said I was going to talk a little bit about workflow visualizations. And so we do actually, our Beacon solution ships with two different workflow visualizations. And this governance workflow visualization is a free download from your SharePoint app store. You can install this into your system, but we build out these visualizations. So whether you have a simple governance process where you do a quick review and then you move into project execution, or if you have a more complex proposal, selection, planning, and execution stage, you can support multiple different types of projects with different workflows. The workflow then allows you to have a standard process where you are gathering the approvals and you can understand where you are. So you can see what pages have been filled out. You can see, what stages have been completed. Okay, so I've gone through and I've completed a bunch of these stages, and I'm waiting for input on project execution before I go to my closure review so I can see where that's at. And if I need to drill down and who approved that, I can actually go see who approved it. Chad did on February 1st. That's completed. It's approved, and where it has gone through in the various process. So it's nice to be able to layer on this process and being able to see where you are. I mean, it's amazing to me how many people participate in a project and they don't know where the project is. Oh, we're in project execution. Did we go through these other steps? Yes, we did. I got check marks on each one. Just being able to visually see that is a layer of governance. It's a layer of control that is very helpful for you. Now, when you're rolling up multiple projects and you've got tons and tons of things to see, we have a purpose-built dashboard called the O1 My Portfolio, which allows you to see programs. So we tag projects with a program designation, and then we can look at what phase they're in globally and see where my costs are deployed. So if a program is just starting out, we've got some things in execution, but we got a lot that are still in the proposal stage, that's a helpful visualization to know overall where I'm at. Now this Venus program, most of this is done. I've got maybe a couple of more projects in here, and that's about it. So it's just being able to roll up this information and see it. It really, really becomes helpful to do that. So I hope that you're seeing that there's a lot of this data that you can manage, and you can start to gather this information and lead from where you are. I mean, the idea of we're not all going to start at this level. We're going to start at a level that allows us to manage what we've got. So if you're just looking at the project information and you just want to update stale data, you can go to the project center, take a look at it, make sure that that data is up to date. Just get your tasks in, start to collect your resources, assign those resources to those tasks so that you are developing this assignment information, and then start to layer on the costs, the baselines. The baselines really are generate those red, yellow, greens in those KPIs, as well as start to show you your variances. And we've got reports or places in this application to be able to see this all the way through the process. So I hope you've seen that, yeah, it's a complex undertaking. Yes, there's a lot of data to address, but if you just lead from where you are, you can manage this without hopefully breaking the bank, or without having to, hopefully it's possible for you. I realize that we're coming up on the last 3 minutes. So if you have any other questions, please put some of those questions in. And just briefly, what is a standard configuration? Well, there is no standard configuration or standard roadmap, but this is a pretty common one. When we roll out our Beacon solution, we actually take about 3 weeks to roll this out, and you get a fully configured project environment. essentially what you've seen today, and then you do some custom configuration, then you do some process maturity, then you do procedures and documentation, custom recording, and we're there to support you all along the way. So it is possible to do this. In the old days, this was measured in years. Um, and for some organizations now, it's measured in months. For other organizations, it's measured in weeks. So it really depends upon what you're trying to do and how far you want to take this and what your goals are for achieving that ladder up on the maturity scale. So I wanted to say thank you. If you have any more questions, please put it in. But I do want to say thank you so much for joining us today. I hope this was helpful. We will do more of these as we move forward. I would say probably about once a month, we're doing tips and tricks webinars, and we're doing other webinars, beacon demo webinars and things like that. So really appreciate you taking some time out, and would be happy to answer any questions that you have, or wish you a great day and a great rest of the week. And thanks very much for joining.